All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're tackling something I think we all grapple with a bit, perfectionism. We've got this mini personality test from the Spiritual Seek, and honestly, some of these statements are pretty eye-opening.
You know, it is interesting. The spiritual seek doesn't just slap a perfectionist label on you. It breaks it down with these statements, helping us see how these tendencies might be sneaking into our lives without us even noticing.
Yeah, it's like sneaky perfectionism, so let's just jump right in. The first one is, I hate it when others do things sloppily. Okay, I've definitely been there. But how does this tie into perfectionism?
Well, it's more than just liking things neat. The source explains that for a real perfectionist, it's about needing control, like deep down. They might worry that if something isn't perfect, it reflects badly on them, even if it's someone else's work.
So it's not just about the task itself, but how it makes them look.
Exactly. And that can cause some serious friction in relationships. Think about it. Always feeling like you gotta fix or redo what others do, that's a recipe for frustration and conflict. The spiritual seek even mentions it can lead to isolation because perfectionists, they might find it tough to relax or collaborate.
Oh, I see, yeah. Always on edge, waiting for things to go wrong. Exhausting for everyone, really. Okay, what's the next statement on the Spiritual Seeks list?
This one gets a bit personal. Criticism devastates me psychologically.
Ooh, that one kind of stings, doesn't it? I mean, who loves criticism? But why is it such a big deal for perfectionists?
The spiritual seek says it's because they often take criticism as a personal attack. It's like confirming their worst fear that they're not good enough. Triggers this feeling of shame that's hard to shake.
Is that why they might dodge situations where they could be judged? Like, avoid risks or not even go after the things they're passionate about because of that fear of failing, of looking imperfect?
Totally. And the spiritual seek connects this to social anxiety, which makes sense. It's like they're always bracing for that failure, even if it's all in their head.
That's a lot to carry around, you know?
Yeah.
Setting themselves up for disappointment because, let's be real, no one's perfect all the time.
Mm.
All right, what else does the Spiritual Seek have for us?
Okay, number 3. I focus on details until the result is perfect. This one's interesting because it shows how perfectionism can actually backfire.
I can see that. You know, people who get so lost in the details they miss deadlines, never even finish the project. What's the Spiritual Seek's take on this?
They call it decision paralysis. Perfectionists can get so hung up on making the perfect choice, they end up procrastinating or overthinking everything.
So scared of messing up, they end up not moving forward at all. It's like they say, perfect is the enemy of good.
Exactly. The spiritual seek really emphasizes the frustration and anxiety this causes. Spending hours on something, but it's never good enough, drains your energy, stifles creativity.
Totally. This one really shows how perfectionism can turn something fun, like creating or working on a project, into a big ball of stress. Okay, what's next?
All right, number 4. I always want to achieve the most in what I do. Now, this might not sound bad at first. I mean, ambition is good, right?
True, but I'm sensing the Spiritual Seek is digging a little deeper here.
Right. It's not just about doing well. It's about your self-worth being tied to your accomplishments. Like, their value as a person depends on how much they achieve.
So less about outward success, more about proving something to themselves.
Yeah. And the spiritual seek points out that this can come from childhood experiences, maybe parents or teachers who emphasized achievement, or just growing up in a culture that's all about competition and winning.
Always trying to prove themselves to everyone, including themselves.
And that's exhausting. Leads to burnout, anxiety, never feeling good enough.
It's amazing how these simple statements from the Spiritual Seek can reveal so much. What's next?
Here's one that might hit home for some. I prefer to make do since others are not up to it.
Ooh, yeah, this one could rub people the wrong way. Sounds kind of superior, right? But is there more to it?
Definitely. The spiritual seek explains it's that frustration when others don't have the same high standards. They might genuinely believe they're the only ones who can do it right, so they take on too much.
Yeah, I can see how that gets old fast. And lonely.
Exactly. Might lead to self-improvement, independence, sure. But it can also get in the way of forming real connections. The spiritual seek even says it can make their social life feel, well, empty and superficial.
Wow, that's heavy. Even if they're successful on their own, they might be missing out on that joy of teamwork, of shared success. Okay, hit us with the last statement from the Spiritual Seek test.
All right, last one. The idea of making mistakes causes me great concern. I think we all feel this a little, but for perfectionists, it's way more intense.
It all goes back to that fear of failure, right?
Exactly. Mistakes aren't just learning experiences, they're proof of flaws, of shortcomings.
Each mistake chipping away at that image of themselves as competent, successful.
Right. The spiritual seek highlights how this fear of messing up leads to constant self-criticism, anxiety, makes it hard to relax, to enjoy life. Like they're always on high alert, trying to avoid that dreaded mistake.
So, listeners, as we wrap up this first part of our dive, think about these statements from the spiritual seek. Which ones really resonated with you? What does that tell you about your own relationship with this whole perfectionism thing?
We've only scratched the surface, but it's clear this perfectionism is a complicated beast with deep roots. Stick around for part 2, where we'll get into the spiritual seek's scoring system and what it means to be on that perfectionism spectrum.
Welcome back to our perfectionism deep dive. We just went through all those statements from the spiritual seek's little personality test. Pretty thought-provoking, right? Now I'm kind of curious, how does this all add up to an actual score? Where do we land on this whole perfectionism spectrum, according to the spiritual seek?
Well, each statement we talked about, that's a point. So if you really related to all 6, you're racking up those perfectionism points.
So, more points, more for perfectionist. Seems simple enough. But I bet the spiritual seek doesn't just leave us with a number. They probably have some fancy labels for these scores, right?
Oh, you know they do. They've got categories. 0 points. Anything but a perfectionist. 1 or 2 points puts you in the not much of a perfectionist group. 3 or 4, you're a perfectionist without excess.
Okay, so far so good. Those labels seem pretty reasonable, but I have a feeling things get a little, more dramatic as we climb that score ladder. What happens when we hit those higher numbers?
Hold on tight. 5 or 6 points. The spiritual seek calls you a perfectionist maniac.
Maniac, that's a strong word. Should people be freaking out if they land in this category?
Of course not. It's just a mini personality test, not a diagnosis or anything. But the spiritual seek does make an interesting connection here between this extreme perfectionism and OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder.
Oh, I see why they might use maniac then. But I thought OCD was more about those repetitive things like washing hands all the time or checking things over and over. How does that connect to perfectionism?
That's a common misunderstanding. Yeah, those outward behaviors are what people often think of. But at its core, OCD is about having these intrusive thoughts and feeling like you got to do certain rituals to ease the anxiety. And what the spiritual seek is suggesting is that some of those perfectionist tendencies we talked about, that intense fear of messing up, the need for absolute control, those can be linked to that same obsessive compulsive spectrum.
So it's not about the specific actions, but the anxiety underneath and how people try to deal with it.
Exactly. And that's why understanding this whole perfectionism spectrum is important. It's not just about being organized or detail-oriented. It can be a real struggle for some people, affecting their mental health, their well-being.
This is really fascinating stuff. But, what about those of us who landed somewhere in the middle? The perfectionists without excess. What does that even mean? Can you be a perfectionist without it taking over your whole life? Is there such a thing as healthy perfectionism?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And while the spiritual seek doesn't specifically use that term, healthy perfectionism, they do kind of hint at it when they talk about balance. It's about recognizing those perfectionist tendencies and learning how to, well, manage them.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So we've been on this journey with a spiritual seek, exploring perfectionism. We've seen how it can show up, how they score it, even how it might connect to things like OCD. But now I'm really curious about this whole healthy perfectionism idea. Is that even a thing? Can we take this drive to excel and actually make it work for us?
That's the big question, right? And while the spiritual seek doesn't come right out and say healthy perfectionism, they do touch on it when they talk about finding that balance. It's about knowing yourself, those perfectionist tendencies, and learning to, well, handle them.
So not trying to get rid of them completely, but figuring out how to work with them. But how do we actually do that?
Self-awareness is huge. Honestly, look back at those statements from the spiritual seek. Which ones really resonated? How are those tendencies playing out in your life right now? Are they helping you reach goals, or are they just causing stress, holding you back?
So get curious about our own behavior without judging ourselves.
Yeah. Once you see your own patterns, you can start making choices about how to manage them. Like, if you're always criticizing yourself, setting crazy high standards, you can start challenging those thoughts.
So instead of getting stuck in that chase for perfect, we shift focus to progress, growth.
Exactly. Celebrate those wins, even the small ones. And remember, mistakes happen. It's part of the deal. They're actually chances to learn.
It's about embracing the journey, not getting fixated on some destination that might not even exist.
You got it. And setting realistic goals is key. You don't have to do everything perfectly all the time. It's okay to prioritize, delegate, ask for help, and maybe most importantly, build in time for rest, for self-care.
So, not becoming lazy, but finding a way to achieve things without burning out.
Right. Real success is more than just checking boxes on a to-do list. It's about a fulfilling life, one with joy, connection, purpose.
I think that's a great point to end on. The spiritual seek might have focused on the downsides of perfectionism, but I think this deep dive has shown us it's complicated. It's got potential for both good and bad.
And as we wrap up, here's a final thought. Are there areas in your life where striving for excellence, even a little bit of that perfectionist drive, could actually be a good thing? Maybe in your health, relationships, creative stuff. Think about it, see where it leads you.
I love that. Sometimes that desire to be great can be the push we need to do amazing things. So keep exploring, keep striving, but most importantly, be kind to yourselves along the way. Until next time, everyone.